Hi, I'm Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds. There's a couple things today that I'd like to share with you since we last posted. The deposition of cesium throughout northern Japan is extensive. Now, the Japanese are allowing that material to be burned if the concentration of radioactivity on anything that's radioactive is less than 8,000 becquerels per kilogram. What that means is 2 pounds, about a kilogram, can be disintegrating at 8,000 disintegrations every second, and the Japanese are allowing that to be burned. Here in the United States, that would be considered radioactive waste and would have to be disposed of underground for thousands of years. But as long as it's less than 8,000 disintegrations per second, the Japanese are allowing that to be burned. Not only that, and this is actually more disconcerting, they're allowing blending. So if one sample had 24,000 disintegrations per second and another 2 had none, they combine those so that the 3 on average have 8,000 disintegrations per second and they're allowed to be burned. Well, that has lots of serious ramifications. First off, it's basically the material that's already come out of Fukushima and is on the ground is now going airborne again, deliberately. So the towns around and areas around schools, school playgrounds that have been cleaned up from Fukushima are now getting cesium redeposited on them by the burning of the material. So the clouds of radiation from the different areas that are having fires in Japan right now are recontaminating areas that have been sampled as clean or low. And in fact, now we'll see higher radiation. It doesn't stop just at the Japanese border, but of course continues across the Pacific into the Pacific Northwest as well. So by allowing the burning of material, we're basically recreating Fukushima all over again. And we're sending into the air that which has been deposited on the ground. There's also some data that the ground deposition is running out into rivers and now into the ocean, relatively far away from Fukushima. So while the focus has been on just the Fukushima site, in fact now we're seeing radioactive rivers further away, which are also contaminating the ocean. Japan has a problem, a tough problem. But in order to solve the tough problem, first you have to recognize there is a tough problem. And this constant ignoring of the significance of the problem by the Japanese government is in fact making the problem longer and eventually more costly than doing it right the first time. I think the Japanese need to recognize that they have a problem and it's serious, and they have to recognize that it's going to cost a lot of money to fix. But it is fixable if it begins with the concept that there's a serious problem that needs to be solved. Thank you.
So we have two different points of view here. We have the point of view of the Japanese government, who are ignoring it, who are making these superficial measurements of cesium in the whole bodies of the children and the people, and are saying that these concentrations are not sufficient to cause any problems. Well, of course, this is an argument that's going on and on. It's like a tennis match, goes backwards and forwards. You know, the independent scientists say there's a problem, and the government and the nuclear scientists say there's no problem. Of course, the real problem is that we have to do something about it. I mean, I am a father. I have 7 children. I have 11 grandchildren. And I can't sit back and just let this go on with us in some sort of silly tennis match between us and the pro-nuclear scientists who are trying to save the industry from collapse. And all the time the children are getting more and more sick, and they're building up this level of radioactive damage, which will result in them getting sick and dying with cancer, heart disease, whole range of illnesses that were all discovered after Chernobyl. And it's not as if this is something new. We know what's going to happen. We absolutely know what's going to happen. We have looked very closely at the health effects of people who were exposed to these same radionuclides after the Chernobyl accident in the same quantities. Not as many people, I have to say, which is why Fukushima is a worse disaster. So I decided we had to do something, and I was contacted by some people in Japan who said, what can we do? So instead of just moaning about it, we decided to do something. Now there are actually some things that we can do. The first thing we can do is we can actually measure, they're saying, that's the first point. So we need to have independent testing. And secondly, we need to try and do something about these children who are being contaminated. There are two things we can do. The first thing is we can take them away from the areas of contamination and put them somewhere where it's reasonably safe. But that leads us to another problem, because what's happening now, as I'm told, is that the Japanese government are trucking radioactive material from the Fukushima disaster area, where it's contaminated, all over Japan. And even as far south as the south of Japan, we're now getting reports of radioactive material being taken all the way to the south of Japan to be burned. Now, what possible reason could there be for burning it as far away as that? I'll tell you the reason. It's really quite sinister and horrifying. The reason is this, that eventually when these children start to die from leukemia, from other cancers, from heart disease, from whatever, their parents are going to want to go into court. They're going to want to sue the Japanese government, and they're going to want to have to say, in order to do that, these children were contaminated, and that's why they've got high levels of cancer. But of course, the only way that they can say that they've got high levels of cancer is to have a control group in an area that's not contaminated. For example, the south of Japan. So I believe that the project to take this material and burn it all over Japan is to destroy all of Japan, is to increase the cancer rate in the whole of Japan so that there will be no control group to which you can compare these children in the Fukushima area. So that's that point. So we want to take the children away anyway into some safe area. That's what we want.